All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our public meeting this afternoon to deal with two items, the Demonte drain and the Nguyen drain. And I would like to a roll call. We have Councillor Jobin and Councillor Houston, who are on personal leave, will not be part of our meeting this afternoon. And so I'll call the meeting to order. And in our land acknowledgement, I want to acknowledge that we are on land and surrounded by water originally inhabited by Indigenous peoples who have traveled this area since time immemorial. This territory is within the lands honored by the Wampum Treaties, agreements between Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee, Lenni, and Lenape and allied nations to peacefully share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. Specifically, we would like to acknowledge the presence of the Three Fires Confederacy, the Ojibwe, Ottawa, the Potawatomi, Huron-Wendat people, and the Caldwell First Nation. We are dedicated to honoring Indigenous history and culture while remaining committed to moving forward respectfully First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. To the members present, any disclosure of pecuniary interest on the interest presented to you this afternoon? Hearing none. We will now move to the introduction. And purpose of our meeting is to hear from affected owners who wish to appeal his or her assessment for the Demonte drain. And first, and I will call upon Alicia, our drainage engineer, superintendent, to also add any background required for our meeting this afternoon.
Thank you, Your Worship. On February 14th of 2023, Council approved the technical aspects of the report at the meeting to consider for the Demonte drain and provisionally adopted bylaw 2023-021. No issues from landowners were brought forward at that meeting. Since the meeting to consider, I have heard from one landowner, and our engineer, Mark Hernandez from Dillon Consulting, was able to provide answers to their questions. One delegate, Mr. Demonte, has registered to speak to the court this evening. Mark Hernandez from Dillon Consulting is also joining us virtually to help answer any questions that the court or the delegate may have. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you. And I believe Mr. Demonte, well, first I'll ask members of council, is there any questions at present? If not, we can defer till after the delegate speaks. Okay, Mr. Demonte.
Yes, right here. Yeah, I just object to the cost that I'm being assessed here because I'm not getting any benefit from Laval putting the concrete liner there in the drain. They're the people that are causing the damage to the drain there, and I think even if we put the liner on there, they're going to damage it further anyway, because I think they've outgrown their operation there. So anyway, I don't know why I'm paying such a, I don't know, over $20,000 here for something that gives me no benefit at all.
Okay, Mr. Hernandez, can you weigh in on Mr. Demonte's question here?
Certainly, thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. The question surrounding what treatment to use in front of the Laval property has had significant discussion, meetings, correspondence, and it originated. Well, at first, the issue is to address just the normal repair and improvement of the open drain as it is, just to bring it back into working condition. So that was kind of the base condition that we needed to meet. And then in addition to that, a representative of Laval had expressed concern with respect to bank stability, and then had requested an enclosure of that section of the drain. Again, there was significant discussion about that, cost estimates provided, discussion between the ownership of Laval and with Mr. Demonte. And Ultimately, we didn't proceed with the enclosure of that drain based on Mr. DeMonte's concerns about not just with respect to the cost, but also how that property would be used and by Laval and how that might affect his operations. So we didn't proceed with the enclosure. What we then did was, I would say, a bit of a middle ground to not provide the enclosure that was requested, but also to address the bank stability concerns that Laval brought up. And so we've recommended a cable concrete liner for that particular section of concern. And what we've done with respect to the assessments is assess half of the cost to Laval for the portion that fronts their property. And the reason that Mr. DeMonte is affected is because we're assessing the half that is towards the road to Mr. DeMonte. That roadway is a private roadway owned by Mr. DeMonte. So half the assessment is to Laval and half of it is to the roadway. And there was correspondence with all parties leading up to the completion of the report to that effect.
Just a question to you, Mr. Hernandez. On the normally, if somebody requests an enclosure on their property and that, usually, correct me if I'm wrong, but usually that assessment goes to the landowner with the request for the enclosure on their property. Am I correct in assuming that?
Yes, except in this case, the drain is on the road property adjacent to the Laval property. So they were requesting an enclosure that would actually be on Mr. DeMonte's property. And they were willing to pay a portion of it. I know obviously Mr. DeMonte had concerns about the financial, but as I said, that wasn't, and Mr. DeMonte's here and he can obviously speak to it, but my takeaway from our discussions was that the concern was more about how the property would be used. Would trucks be parked there? Would it be something that impedes the flow of traffic to Mr. DeMonte's place of business? And that seemed to be the overriding concern. But it is on Mr. DeMonte's property, but it was requested by, or was concerns raised by Laval.
I guess my other question, Mr. Hernandez, in your opinion, then I know that the ditch in that area, I guess you want to call it, or the drain itself is, the banks are very steep. And I know there was a lot of, because I was on site there a couple of times. There was a lot of material in the bottom. And so by protecting obviously the bank itself from collapsing, or again, will probably add, I would think, longevity to the maintenance piece of that drain moving forward. Would I be correct in saying that?
Yes, sir, I believe you would.
Okay. Is there any further questions, members of council?
Can I add one thing?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, the only place we have a problem there is in front of Laval, and it's because of the heavy traffic that's imposed on the ditch there. And so I mean, the rest of it is fine. It just needs cleaning. But in that portion there, because of the heavy traffic that's imposed on it there, it's causing the problems, and and that's caused by Laval, as far as I'm concerned.
But but I would say, Mr. DeMonte, by making those improvements, it's not just one area. It's basically the drain itself will benefit, for the longevity of the serviceability. I think that's, I presume that's where the engineers are looking at as well. And it's probably the next best scenario compared to a complete culvert build, which would be extremely expensive, especially in that area. So I think it's, I understand the value, I think, in the investment that'll be made to preserve, I think, the time for maintenance as we move forward, and to protect, obviously, the integrity of the banking of the drain, I think is a factor, I think, that contributed to the the decay of the effectiveness of the drain over a period of time. And so I think it's to the engineers that I think are trying to find some common ground, and I think they've done that, certainly in that drain. And so further costs down the road, which I think that's where the real benefit is going to be, as we move forward.
Can I ask a question? Where are they putting the cabling? Are they putting it in front of RJ Sear and Laval, or just in front of Laval?
Either Alicia or Mr. Hernandez. I don't know if you got that question.
Yes, thank you. Yes, it's primarily in front of Laval.
So it's not in front of RJ Sear
The
and Harris Rebar.
the description of work, I'm just trying to find it so that I could quote it directly. It actually gives the stations in which it will be installed. So item 3A on page 7 of 49 gives the actual stations for you. And then we can correlate that to the drawing. So it's, just give me a moment. It's up to the, yeah, it's just Laval. It's just Laval.
Well, that's my point, because if it's gonna reduce the cost down the road, why don't we do it all over the place there? And, but it's Laval because that's where the damage is occurring.
That was the specific area of concern that was identified, was in front of Laval, yes.
But that's where I think the bottleneck or the part of the problems, upstream from that area is going to be, that's what we're trying to prevent, is obviously everything downstream from there by protecting the bank.
I mean, look, I'm not opposed to it there, but I think they're causing the problem, and I think that they should pay for it, because it's not, it doesn't benefit me at all here. I mean, if the road was used properly there, we wouldn't have the problem.
Yeah. Well, we'll certainly take your comments, Mr. Devontae, under advisement.
Thank you.
Any further questions or comments? I don't see any from this end. I don't know if there's anything else Mr. Hernandez or our drainage superintendent would want to add at this stage. Good. Okay. Then we'll move on. Yeah, we're going to move on now to the Gouin drain. And again, I will ask our drainage superintendent just to give us some background on the Gouin drain.
Thank you, Your Worship. On February 14th of 2023, Council approved the technical aspects of the report at the meeting to consider for the Gouin drain and provisionally adopted bylaw 2023-022. No issues from landowners were brought forward at that meeting. Myself, John Henderson, and Mark Hernandez from Dillon Consulting had a meeting with Mr. John Crispo on March 3rd of 2023 to discuss his request for abandoning the north branch of the Gouin drain. It was also brought to my attention that a letter from Mr. Crispo has been circulated to other landowners. This letter provided misinformation to landowners, and unfortunately, because of that, the Drainage Department has been fielding phone calls and emails to provide the correct information. One resident, Mr. Dominic Vaselli, has registered as a delegate for this evening. I spoke with Mr. Vaselli this morning about his concerns regarding his father's assessment. Mark Hernandez is joining us virtually to help answer any questions and to outline communication item 2E, which was a response to Mr. Crispo's concerns in communication item 2D. Thank you.
Okay, anything you want to add, Mr. Hernandez, at this point?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to take a moment to speak to the letter that I provided, which I believe was a supplement for the board. There were a number of meetings held, throughout the process, including the statutory site meeting. But there was also a specific meeting held with landowners at Tecumseh Arena to talk about the Gwen Drain Branch North, which is the specific section of the drain, as Ms. Musio mentioned, that is of concern. So there was a meeting held at that time to specifically walk through with all of the impacted residents, what is out there for, particularly for us, myself as a drainage engineer and Mr. Paglia at the time, to understand, what the landowners had and what their concerns were. And we provided a summary of that meeting and with a table of all the comments that we received. So we had reached out to them to understand who's using it, what their concerns are, does anybody still need it? And what we found is that there was a little bit of a mix. Many landowners, as you'll note in those meeting minutes, are using it. Some do have drainage that goes to the front yard, as would be the case in a typical subdivision. Some weren't entirely sure what they had. There was one in particular, I recall, person who mentioned that they thought they might have built their deck over some of their drainage infrastructure. And our takeaway from that meeting, however, was that the drain is still being used by a number of the affected landowners. And so we intended to repair the concern with that drain and move forward in keeping it. So we did engage the landowners. We did have a special meeting just for them to walk through that. And we did take their comments back and incorporate it into the report. So we did make them aware. We do know they're using it. There was a few comments that we received with respect to landowners who are using the drainage to the front of their property installed through the subdivision, typical kind of subdivision drainage. And the information that we've provided is essentially that a landowner may not use it, be using the Gwen drain at this current time, but if they have the drain in their property, they have the opportunity to use it at any time. And if a property were to change hands, a future landowner could then take advantage of it as well. So my thought process is, and I think, in following the Drainage Act process is to continue to assess those properties' benefit. There was some concerns about other lands, like for example along Shawnee, that there are these other lands that are supposedly using the Gwen Drain Branch North, but they're not being assessed. And I just wanted to speak to that and note that we went through a lot of detail breaking down the watershed, the various sub-watershed areas where they drain to, and we made sure that each of the landowners was only being assessed for costs related to the actual path that their water takes. And so there's no situations where, in this case, where anybody's using the Gwen Drain Branch North but isn't being assessed for it. All of the properties that have been identified as using that drain have been assessed. There are other lands that are upstream, of the branch drain, but they take a different path out to the Gwen Drain and ultimately to Little River, and they're assessed for that different path. There was a number of comments about the costs, why it wasn't maintained sooner. There was some discussion about, what transpired when that Corby subdivision was built in the late 1990s. And there was a feeling, I think, from the residents that they were being, unduly impacted by the costs of trying to address all of that now. And it's something that we identified, through our discussions with the landowners and through my discussions with administration about what took place. And we've tried to identify what those additional costs are, and in a good faith effort for the residents, tried to as I said, quantify those costs, and as I've noted in my letter, assess the substantial portion of that to the town. I think there are things that we can all agree that if it happened today, the way in which it played out may have happened differently. And so we've assessed 73% of the cost to the municipality, with the balance being assessed to those on the Gwen Drain Branch North that are using it, both for benefit and outlet. The last comment I wanted to speak to was with respect, as Ms. Musia mentioned, there's some question about whether or not the Gwen Drain Branch North should be abandoned. I do have a number of concerns with respect to that request. Primarily, we know, based on the feedback that we received, that a number of landowners are using this drain, and having this drain through the Drainage Act allows the municipality, or requires the municipality actually to undertake the maintenance. It gives them access to do it. If the drain were to be abandoned, the municipality has no further obligation, and then there become issues with respect to those who are still using it. How does it get maintained? Who has the right to maintain it? How do they get access? How do they recover their costs? All of those questions then arise. So, in the absence of some resolution to those questions, we're recommending that it be maintained as a drain. So we have had two discussions with Mr. Crispo. In addition to the landowner meeting, in addition to a public information center, we did have two individual meetings with Mr. Crispo as well to walk through these various questions that he had. But I do understand that he still had remaining questions lingering that I believe he put in a letter to council. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Hernandez. To the members of council, any questions to the engineers or the superintendent at this stage? If not, then I believe Mr. Vasily is now, the floor is yours.
Okay, your worship and members of council, can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. So I did review the Schedule C, and of course there's 12 property owners that were assessed. As Mr. Hernandez said, that the municipality of the town of Tecumseh, I think they took 73% of the bulk of the cost, and 25% maybe was attributed to the property owner. Is that correct?
73% to the municipalities.
Right. Oh, okay. And 27% then. All right. So then I noticed each one had their measurement of their property, and I think total acres or total square footage of their property, which I think transformed into acres. And I think, I don't know the math, but I'm sure that you probably took, in my father's case, 0.74 acres. Total acres is 2.74, and then you took the 18 grand, because I just want to know the math. Or because I noticed, Mr. Hernandez and members of council and your worship, I noticed there is a benefit portion and also an outlet portion.
Correct. Mr. Hernandez?
Thank you very much. Yeah, and it's a very good question. I'm happy to explain it. It's not perfectly straightforward. We do have spreadsheets that we use, obviously the amount of information here to try and calculate through. but I'll try to boil it down. The benefit assessment is largely based on the land use type and the size of the property, the frontage. And so in this case, the specific area of concern, the area that's being repaired, is in those first three properties, that front Corby, as well as your father's property, which is off of Gwen. So it's kind of on a, the drain is on the side yard to that property, and for the other properties, it's in their rear yards. So the repair area is directly adjacent to those properties, and that's why they have the benefit assessment. The outlet assessment is related to the amount of water that's being generated and contributing to the drain, and it's based on the land use and the land size. And so I know the concern was, why is the assessment for that your father's property, why is it higher? And largely the simple answer is because it's much bigger relative to the other properties. We did look at it carefully in terms of assessing the benefit to make sure that we weren't unduly assessing cost to that property, like that it was fair in relation to, because it's a side yard and it's very long, making sure that we didn't, unduly assess additional benefit when really in a practical sense that wasn't being realized. So we did account for that. We also accounted for it in terms of what we use. We call it a factored area approach, which reflects like how much water comes off which is essentially to say how much water comes off the property. And because in your father's property, in the case of your father's property, because the backyard is much bigger and there's more green space, the factor comes down. So all of that to say, the property is multiple times bigger than the other properties that face Corby, but don't have a like linearly proportional impact on the cost, because there are these other factors in terms of making sure the benefit is real, is properly reflective, and that the factored area is correct, and so on. So I know it's a lot, and I'm trying not to get too technical. What I want to try and assure you is that everybody was given the same consideration, and that we did try to make adjustments to make sure that like the unique shape and location of that property relative to the drain, that was properly considered and accounted for.
So further to that, I just wanted to know, when you did that assessment through probably of that whole drain stemming from basically Maisonneuve to Gwen, that's the piece, isn't that, Mr. Hernandez? Or is that,
No.
well, not actually Maisonneuve, I'm sorry, just before that, it curves in to that drain. Is that the piece that we're really looking at? Because I heard that that maybe it was crushed at one area because of maybe a structure that went on it. Why wasn't it, if the rest of the drain is in shape, why don't we just repair the piece where the structure is on it, the structure that collapsed the actual drain? Right.
Great question. So the section of drain that we're talking about, if you do have time, I would suggest you look at it's drawing 5 of 21 in the report. You'll see it, to illustrate exactly where it is, but it's the Gwen Drain branch north. It starts at about 1830 Corby, heading north towards Gwen Street.
Correct.
And you're right. So and maybe we should back up. I should back up a little bit, because the original alignment of that drain in 1987 ran through that alignment, prior to the existence of that Corby subdivision. And when the Corby subdivision came in, they relocated the drain into the Corby Lane Road right of way, and in the rear yards of the homes on Corby and Shawnee and the adjacent to your father's property, they put in this small diameter drain with catch basins, and took a portion of it south to the Gwen Drain and a portion of it north to Gwen Street. And then, it all converges at the same point, but they took two different routes to get there. For some reason, back at that time, they only installed portions of it in 300 in a small diameter HTP, and they left a large diameter corrugated steel pipe, and it's that corrugated steel pipe that's failing, and it's only about 2.5 properties backyards wide roughly, so we can kind of get a sense of how long it is, and we're only fixing that. Everything else is that we're aware of is okay. We had it cameraed, and to the extent that we were able to, like, that the camera was able to access and we could get into view, that's the area, and that's the area that we're focusing on. And so that's why it's those 3 properties: 1800, 1806, 1812 Corby, and 11961 Gwen Street that are directly affected.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vasili. And any further questions at this time? To your benefit, Mr. Vasili, this will come back to council on April the 11th, and I believe at that particular time. So obviously your comments and certainly the additional comments that Mr. Hernandez brought as well will be incorporated in the decision on April 11th.
Thank you, your worship. I have one comment. May I make it?
Sure.
All right. Maybe next time when we have online meetings, for the senior residents and elderly residents of Tecumseh who do not have a laptop, we should try to make other provisions. My father could not be here because I couldn't go to his house because there is no internet, and I had to drag him over here, so I have to represent him at my house. So it becomes, it's his property, and he really couldn't partake because of lack of, let's say, a laptop or internet. That's the only comment I have.
All right. Also, there's the availability also, Mr. Vasili, of calling in, but certainly we'll, the other means of communications for sure. I'm sure you're keeping him on top of the information as well.
I am.
On that, but there's if there's no internet, then there's still, he could have called in as well. So
Okay.
there's some opportunities for him to certainly avail himself of that communication piece.
Thank you.
Go ahead,
Thank you
Mr. Bartnick.
Thank you, your worship, and to the members of the court. I just wanted to provide some information to you. So as part of the Drainage Act process itself, there are prescribed points of consultation in front of council, which would be the meeting to consider, followed by the court of revision, which is what we're at here today. Following the court, any landowner has the ability to appeal to the Drainage Tribunal within 40 days of the date that the notice of the court of revision that was sent out. So following that 40-day period, administration would look to bring back the provisional bylaw for the third and final reading at that time.
Which is, I believe, April 11th. Okay, it'll be the next one. So that would be, that's not February. I think we passed that. Anyway, we're done with February. Yeah, so that'd be the 25th. Yeah, April 25th. That was my mistake. Thank you, Ms. Bartnick. Okay, if there's no further questions or comments on this, later in our public meeting, we'll have 2 readings certainly to that bylaw. But in the meantime, we do have some communication pieces. If I could have a motion to receive said communication. Councillor Dorner and Councillor Tonio, all in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. And if there's no further questions or comments, then adjournment's in order. Counselor Tonia moves, Counselor Higginson support. All in favor? Oppose if any, that is carried. Again, thank you to Mr. Vasili and certainly Mr. Hernandez and to our superintendent for our meeting today. So with that being said, we are now adjourned. Thank you.